Hey everybody, welcome back to the Open Source Office. Once again, this is Tex, Open Source Program Manager. I'm also here with Christian, and we're going to get back into a little bit of a podcast with just the two of us here, kind of a catch-up of everything that's happened in 2025 and a little bit of our direction moving forward.
Yep. Hey, everybody. Christian, I think everybody kind of knows me. As Tex was mentioning, we're doing this also because we're kind of in a transition period with Cardano and open source maturity. And we're kind of changing the theme of how we do stuff. So if you did get to catch this presentation in the Cardano Summit, it's kind of a little rehash. We'll add some extra commentary, but this is to show everyone what 2026 is going to be all about. So, yeah. Welcome to the new open source frontier. So the whole theme we're going for is we're getting rid of this centricism, where instead of trying to establish pioneers and frontier towns, we're actually at this space era where we're trying to terraform other planets, quote unquote, projects or ecosystems, and trying to make Cardano more of a mainstay as an open source influencer, as well as a collaborator to other planets and ecosystems, etc. So excuse the cheesiness, but as everyone's already saying, Cardano isn't going to the moon. We're already at the moon. So why don't we just start expanding our planetary presence from there?
Yeah, sounds perfect. So we'll kick this off here with why open source? What is open source? Why does it matter? So obviously with open source here, it's the practice of building technology openly, transparently, and collectively. So bringing us all together to work as a team and freely share the things that we are, this project, this innovation that we are developing on here. It allows anyone to come and read, use, improve. Basically, anyone can go and take this software and change it for their own purposes. So, of course, there is open source licensing alongside of that. It's something that we are always keeping a close eye on here, but operating within the current standards that are out there and trusted as of today. This also does encourage trust and resilience. Review Cardano is a blockchain that's founded on peer review here. I hope to continue to drive faster innovation by not only avoiding silos, but removing silos and also attacking duplicated efforts and trying to put this into a cleaner development track that's better understood by not only the core developers, but also these other projects who will continue to integrate. This also serves as a digital equivalent of public infrastructure here. So again, open, accessible, shared. We're going to be talking through all of those words continuously as we have been, but continued. That's open source. That's why we're here.
And so thus begins. So when we're thinking about open source culture within Cardano, a lot of it was fragmented. Like open source was here in essence just because of Web3 practices of transparency, open building, and since it's fintech on top of that, we needed those levels to ensure decentralized cohesion amongst the ecosystem. But a lot of these projects are fragmented in the sense that they have centric developers, noting even the complexity of the Haskell language, programming language, lack of diversity with nodes, and the practice of open source other than code publicly available on GitHub. There wasn't really a culture practice behind it, just the ethos of Web3 and that fragmented response. So the mission that we came into when IO was trying to figure out when we hand the source code over is how do we do this? What's the best method? How do we improve open source culture across? That way we can actually start saying we are a community-centric and owned collaboration effort when it comes to our public code. So that's where Intersect was founded. And in most cases, you don't typically find an open source office within a member-based organization or an open source nonprofit. It's usually just a part of how they operate. But because we had to streamline and build a cohesive narrative and all these frameworks, we needed a specific department to drive and not necessarily force, but influence this decision across the ecosystem. And since everyone was already doing the basics of open source practice, that's where Intersect was able to help pioneer this new open source frontier. So innovation existed, but direction and sustainability were missing. We had no unified governance or funding model that tied projects together, other than what's their technical remit and SBOMs. So yeah, that's kind of the charted open source frontier. You can go to the next slide. And that's where we built Intersect. So we were here to coordinate Cardano's open source foundations. And as part of the Voltaire era, we're already building a government on top of the open code. We needed to establish even specific governance around the smaller directives that government would be behind. So Intersect has the 8 committees. Each of them serve a different purpose that wasn't there before, kind of to be stewards or coordinating bodies for public initiatives. And then you have actual organizations built around each of these. And Intersect serves as a steward of the core code base and trying to be an influence for open source foundations. So with us being here, we got committees, working groups, and policy frameworks in place. Unless you're under Intersect, it's not a force mandate, but more of a best recommended practice where we prove these concepts and then try to carry them out, just so we have a more mature open source practice across the way. And so far, we've instituted a security policy so that way issues and escalations can be dealt with, and it's not isolated projects and maintainers trying to figure out what to do. And it's not locked behind a single developer or company, but it actually starts building in more of that decentralized framework. We also have a governance policy that is mandating community inclusion or having the avenues available for people who want to participate, contribute, get guidance, and even try to request features and things that they need for integration related to our core code bases. And we do, with the committees, also have community-led decision-making. So all the policies that we have are coming from the actual members of Intersect, which can be any community members. And at a $10 price point, really anyone can participate in this. So the mission has always been to unify development, ensure sustainability, and uphold transparency. And now we're moving into another age. This was probably 2024 when we were setting up that foundation. Now we're in this Metropolis era, or coming out of it in 2025, where now we actually have a lot more communities coming around, where Pragma is up, and now they actually have a project committee to help incubate their own projects for the community. We also have the CDEC, which is just trying to help suppliers and vendors in the ecosystem coordinate for funding strategies, mission building tooling, or missions around building tools. And then we also have Builder DAO, which is also the same thing, but within a decentralized structure to fund tooling. And then you have Intersect, specifically with the open source committee, we have the paid open source model. And I'll get more into this, but everyone should know that this is a narrative stemming from open source themes everywhere. It's a Web 2 idea that Web 3 is the best positioned frontier to actually initiate this without having the burden of where funding is coming from. But to lock it back in under Intersect, now we're not just an institution, we're an ecosystem of institutions. There's different city-states, nation-states, and we're all wrapped under one unified constitution and government for how things are handled. So governance, technical assurance, and developer relations are maturing in tandem with everyone. And even like us with Pragma, we're each addressing different open source needs, so collaboration is everywhere. And we each kind of have our own executive functions, for lack of a better word. That was quotations, as the community tries to figure out what that means. But essentially, we all operate under open, transparent rules of engagement. And going back to the paid open source model, when you're talking about nation states, everyone may remember the Log4j or Log4Shell is what they call it, where one small logging library in JavaScript became a security vulnerability for almost all top Fortune 100, 500 companies because it was built into their SBOMs. And it was just a maintainer team of 2 or 3 people. And all of a sudden they were held accountable to fix something that they threw out there for free that everyone wanted them to fix because it was a big security risk. So because they were just volunteers, it became into that, like, are they supposed to do this? It was just their passion project. Anyone can use it. It's not their fault that someone incorporated it into their SBOM, etc. So when we're talking about that, that was the pioneering vision behind open source sustainability. Since open source is 90% of company profiles in Web 2, and it's basically the essence of Web 3, specifically with Cardano Core being what everyone's building on until node diversity gets up a little bit. We needed to figure out how we attack this. Now, we are trying to view open source as public infrastructure that should be maintained by the treasury and or the taxpayer fees, quote unquote, that sustain, because open source is the highway that we have to maintain, and we need to make sure there's tar to fill the potholes. We need to make sure we pave new pathways and ensure that roads are still utilized everywhere, and you have the option to travel where you want to day in, day out. So this is inspired by, I think the Severin Tech Fund was the first one to actually take open source sustainability seriously, which is the German government providing a budget to invest in open source infrastructure, specifically Log4j and a few others. And they've had quite a bit of success. And then there's also pain points that we are incorporating in our lessons learned about how you do this, because it's, as we'll get into in the next slide, it's not just about giving money to people. There's different incentives and needs that you have to target the programs to address, and everyone has their own process that they want to use for that. So it's on Cardano to view this as a civic duty, and as we test the pilot for this, hopefully it becomes a reoccurring cadence to ensure that we're never lagging in all the things that we underlying have to rely on.
Perfect. Yes. So what are the needs for any open source project? So keep this a little bit more from a step back approach. Again, as we're trying to apply this to a number of projects that will collaborate and integrate with Cardano, we aren't looking we're looking at core Cardano, but not just specifically at core Cardano. So for any open source project, it should have a license. All right. The license is going to govern how that code, how that software can be used. There should be governance as well. So how is the development run? What is the normal procedure for how updates are made? How can others contribute to the continued development of that program or project? Documentation as well. So documentation should be clear, easy to read, understandable, and it can be set at different for different levels of developers there. But at the end of the day, again, there should still be technical clarity that are contributing. Community is another big piece here. Something that we've tried to focus on is, hey, not only can we help maybe give some visibility to a project, but what are you as a project doing? What are your strategies to attract others, grow, and actually retain developers within your project as well, retain contributors there. The last one is sustainability. So in the build of your project, what are your different pathways to funding? Is your project going to be something that is further integrated into a larger code base, or is it something that may be marketable in its own way? And from that stage, we kind of have a fork in the road. We can determine, hey, do we need to focus on the integration side, or do we need to focus on the commercialization side? And we have a number of different avenues to follow as far as that's concerned. Many of you, if you've been following us, you may be familiar with this particular graphic. So this is back from end of 23, beginning of 24. Realistically, what built the entire open source strategy here for us at Intersect. What we found with core Cardano, basically the staple of what we're working in here, is that there was quite a big lack of community engagement. The code base was consistently defined as complex. We've still noticed from time to time a little bit of a slow development pace, but there have been periods of growth and speedier development. So that's actually in our monthly reports that you can see as well. You can see those different periods throughout the year where more is coming through. But again, overall, it can still be defined as slow, so it's still an active point for us. Limited documentation. I think with any project, you're probably going to hear or see this somewhere. But again, a focus of how we can improve on that documentation is still always going to be a part of the strategy here. There were some centralization concerns. Again, this is going to come in with the governance and contributor standards. So how is someone supposed to contribute to the project, and how do we actually make the decisions on how these updates and upgrades are made? Accessibility issues tying into documentation and other facets of the project here as well. And then again, a lack of transparency. So basically the general understanding that we got is that a lot of these updates would come out. and there wasn't really much behind why were we making this update. And it's on some development roadmap that is not plainly seen to the community. So lots of efforts to really bring that to the forefront and make the project, and again, more accessible. All right.
Nice. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And so from those pain points, that's where we came up with a strategy of topics. So Sandeep went and Sandeep Pandey with Deep Quadrant, when he was on the committee, went and interviewed 20 different stakeholders in the ecosystem to come up with those pain points and then put them into general topics of areas of interest. And that's where you get these 7 bullet points here, which is we had basically complaints come in under there needs to be technical sustainability, governance and decision-making, community engagement, collaboration, technical development and innovation, strategic alignment with goals of the ecosystem, and challenges and opportunities in open source, and then kind of a catch-all bucket for the rest. And so the committee spent a good of it almost 2 to 3 months last year, where we were hashing out the purpose and the remit. And you can see that in the footnote of the slide that we'll share, where we actually need to focus on 3 key areas that open source primarily falls around, which is the governance and decision-making, technical sustainability, and the community engagement and collaboration. You can do anything else, but if you don't have those 3, it is hard to say open source in any sense of the word, because then you're just the code on GitHub, which is the primary thing that we are trying to get rid of. So as we will clarify as we keep going on through the deck, but this is every initiative we are focusing on is hammering these 3 strategic pillars. And once we achieve a certain threshold, then we'll start considering other pillars to add to the strategy. But we're 2 years now into making effort on this, and I think we're finally making the headway to where we can almost call these complete once we roll out the POSM and measure success.
Yes, I was going to add on here as well. I'm not sure that we'll find a middle color for these. Maybe these will all change to be included, but definitely my viewpoint that in 2026, these ones that were not included in the base strategy are going to start to be meshed and melded in here as we transition in 2026. Just continuing to move forward, actually showing and demonstrating that growth in the project here. The only one we might leave out for right now is that additional strategic considerations, right? We might have to stair step as we go through there, but definitely the challenges and the opportunities we've seen to find those pretty clearly, and projects have addressed us with that as well. And then there's some big focus here on the actual technical development, innovation, and then alignment with what the strategy is. And again, having that strategy as the forefront. So the hope is kind of some big change with this graphic as we move through 2026. All right. So Open Source Office, what is it that we provide? What's the purpose behind having the committee? Why is it that you should continue to trust in the work that we're doing here? So one of the first things that we bring, of course, is going to be governance and structure. So we started off very early, I would say. We were in mid 2024. We got the project lifecycle framework coming together, and that was the foundation for our incubation program. There's also a big focus at that point on the licensing and alignment of policies. So basically what we're taking a look at is ensuring that every part of the project or those that are integrating with the project are under the same or a similar license, but also understanding where each project is in terms of its life cycle stage to say, hey, is this something that is actively working and needs to be more top of mind, or is this something that's falling to the wayside or not as important at this time? We still need to be aware of it, but we can focus on it at a later time. When it comes to sustainability, we did have the paid open source model first as a white paper. Again, if you haven't seen a lot of the content on that, I highly encourage you to go and watch step by step. And we are now at the point where we're actually putting that to practice. We introduced our project support services, marketing and legal support, which is something that we consistently do. I would say we do it on a day-to-day basis, although you may see some latency, I guess, a little bit with some of these spotlights, but it doesn't mean that we're not open to providing them. We will still provide those at any point when requested. As far as support and growth, audits, documentation standards, our developer experience working group, and open project calls. We are very comfortable and flexible to integrate projects at any point in any level of the work that we do. It's actually very common for us to facilitate these connections. Our developer experience working group led by our developer advocates here is actually something that is growing quite fast as of this moment, and something that we hope to continue to be a highlight of the paid open source model. We're constantly looking at the documentation to revise that and improve the standards that we have, as well as conducting audits to show continued development on each repository within the core code base. As far as tooling and infrastructure here, again, we've improved the security policy. I think we're on the second or third iteration at this point here. We're continuing to keep a focus on analytics with our business partner, Bitergia, which we'll talk about more later as well. And then just having a better idea of the landscape of the ecosystem and understanding that that is something that's consistently growing. So how do we display that in a way that's most easily understood to say, hey, here's where we are currently, but we're continuing to grow. As far as education and enablement, this is another one of those side features we're always working on. Hey, how can we continue to pass on education? How can we continue to bring new developers into the ecosystem and, again, grow that developer base altogether? But also provide mentorship opportunities for maintainers and contributors so that those that have spent time in the ecosystem are not just, again, falling to the wayside or getting lost in just the pure development work that they're doing. How can they also begin to share that knowledge with others? Community and collaboration, that's really going to go back to the governance and structure that we've established here. So under Intersect, following with the way that the committees work and having working groups established, being able to spin up a working group quickly and get through those topics. We do have the contribution ladder framework, which we're hopefully going to tie into an accreditation program here in 2026 so that we can actually start defining and showing, hey, here's a contributor, the developer that spent a lot of time in the ecosystem, but here's where they are actually growing in terms of what can be recognized by other developers, other maintainers for those future mentorship opportunities. Lastly, again, the metrics and transparency. What we've found is as we continue to grow, we can't celebrate our success without first checking that it's actually happened, right? And so those reports are a big part of what we do, at least as a baseline to say, hey, we're still moving in the right direction.
So this is where we get into, now that we've established what is open source, where did Cardano's journey come in via Intersect, what are the needs of open source projects, and then what is the Open Source Office Committee providing? Now we're getting into how, with us having a treasury on board within Cardano, how do we actually fund the more fundamental problems of open source and make it sustainable? So as I mentioned, there's a common theme, and you'll see it there at the bottom with the Sovereign Tech Fund and even GitHub launching a 1.25 million open source fund with a focus on security for projects. This is a common theme. It started in 2023. And we pioneered with veterans in the open source space how we can help do this. We had, I think, in total 6 collaborators help us get the draft white paper together, and then we put it into a formal deck where we went to the Open Source Summit and presented it to some of the Cardano community that happened to be there. Just to test if this is something that they would be interested in. It had a pretty good reception, so then we went and published the video, then released the white paper, and then it turned into the budget process, and the community supported this overwhelmingly, I think with like 81 to 86%. So this is where Cardano will make a name stay for itself, being a Web3 ecosystem that is funding its own open source projects. And we already have I call it the sphere of influence, but we do have the Linux Foundation, Hedera, and a few other ecosystems taking notice of this and trying to come up with their own versions or iterations, or even taking some of our work and improving it for their needs. So even this is open source. If you want to know the frameworks are implemented, all that's there. But essentially, because Cardano needs reliable, professionally maintained open source infrastructure that doesn't depend on luck, volunteers, or a single company, that's where we have this. So the paid open source model comes into several different things, and we actually came up with the ideas pulling from several different small programs throughout there as we were doing consultation with these experts. And I'll go more into them. And yeah, you can go to the next slide. The number one critical question that is unrelated to anything of actual development is why did you call it Possum? And why did you choose a possum for the possum? And the reason being is most open source stuff has a mascot. So you saw at the beginning of the deck, the penguin. Everyone knows that means Linux. Even our Chinstrap partners use a Chinstrap penguin. And there's a few other things like that. I viewed that possums were ignored, so I chose that as the mascot, but also because paid open source model short is possum. And the day we launched this in my backyard, we actually found 3 baby possums, so it only naturally makes sense. But with possums, the reason why this is so critical is they're resilient and adaptable. Basically, possums are survivors. They've meant to thrive in diverse and harsh environments. They even play dead when predators are around. And they're all about staying together and surviving through that. And that's where the open source landscape can be, especially if you're talking about doing a side project that may or may not be a success, that may or may not get adopted. It can be very tough and hard to maintain and manage that. But the good thing about possums is they also have communal strength, which is the community comes together and they each mirror each other and become a more thriving ecosystem, which is also a strength of open source projects, where it's not usually reliant on one person, but everyone comes together for the same mission and vision behind that project, or just the ethos of open source in general. So that's why that's there. But putting that side note aside, the actual programs and what we're doing is we have it broken up into several categories, where the first one's about sustainability programs, and this is addressing more of the higher needs of a project. So specifically when it comes to maintainers themselves, we're trying to do a maintainer retainer, which as of this point in time has 2 different focuses now, which is we have what we call community maintainers, which is to introduce a new representative from the community, not necessarily directly associated with the project, to help incorporate and be that communal representation of governance participation. It's not necessarily always just throw another engineer into a project, but actually help with more of the open source contribution mechanisms, getting more community engagement that way, and representing the project in different venues as required. And then we also have the, as the name entails, the maintainer retainer, where we actually support some of the founding teams themselves and get them this part-time compensation rate to continue maintenance of the project, and also kind of pour into some of the community governance stuff as required. But this is to make sure we don't lose the tribal knowledge, because if a project like Plutus was not being maintained by IO because they left the ecosystem for some reason, and we have the core dev there who's behind it, we should compensate them to keep that knowledge around. Otherwise, that critical library is now becoming a red flag risk. So that's what this is meant to do. And it's not meant to, or you can go back. This isn't meant to fully compensate the needs of the individual. That way we're keeping the open source ethos behind this, but to give them that compensation that keeps them engaged for the project. And then we're also hitting the tooling sustainability piece, which is with how governance is working in Cardano. People have full development packages that they're putting through and getting funded. So this is tailored to complement that, not to replace it, in the sense that if projects require massive updates or things, they can get approved via the tooling working group in the open source committee to be compensated for things such as updating the project post hard fork, or if we had to force node upgrades because of a certain incident that recently happened, this is something that can assist with that for the approved projects. So the whole idea here is funding for the projects, but with specific outlines for it, so it's not just money thrown and lost. And we have a track record to show that the money is well spent, and we can, with our Bitergia partners, start to see improvements with the projects over time. You can go to the next one. The other area we're trying to engage with is developer growth and engagement programs. So y'all may have seen it before, this little blurb on the Possum slide where it said code with us. This is adapting from that from British Columbia's government for what we're calling code for us, which is where we have a bucket of funds that we can actually allocate to several different projects, where the project themselves or the community itself can request a feature that the community wants, and it's a bounty to be redeemed. So anyone in the community can come code it, get it integrated, you get rewarded for it. That's the basic idea. The developer advocate program, this came about with developer relations in general. It's a big open topic. I originally was going to hire just one developer advocate for the open source office last year, but then I realized it's better if we actually get more coverage, and rather than having one single point of contact, why don't we just compensate people in the community already doing it? So y'all may have seen cohort 1, and now we have cohort 2. I'll hand it to Tex to talk about their accolades here in a second. And then the other thing that we are providing is we do have a bucket of funds for the ad hoc needs for projects. So project support, literally, as we were talking about earlier with Tex, is you walk in a diner and there's a menu item of options, whether it's marketing, you need product development, legal counseling, all those different things. We are here to help compensate those third-party vendor costs to get your needs met. But I'll hand it off to Tex for developer advocates.
Yeah, no, I was going to say on the developer advocate program, not that Christian hasn't provided a lot to what we do, but I want to ensure that there's no fear of centralization within this department here either. And the biggest ado to that, the biggest kudos to that, is our open source committee. And they not only have, or I should say, bring expertise to the table, but they have access to everything basically that we see and work on, aside from like some deep strategy stuff, right? We'll work on some of that in the back end and not overwhelm them. But for everything that we're doing that we have publicized, the open source committee does get a review on that, and they have also contributed to the decision of expanding that program or leaving it open for continued expansion as well. But our developer advocates specifically, I will highlight there in cohort 1, what we took an opportunity to do is show how we can connect and work directly with the community on a very granular level, right? How can we really spearhead this? Let's mentor others. Let's step them through this actual development process. Let's get them thinking about what all do we need to look at from that open source perspective. And so our first 4 went through, got started on some real basic development stuff, and helped us complete our first survey on developer experience specifically. Now, it's not the only developer survey that's out there, but there is a developer ecosystem survey. That question is really geared towards more the high side of, hey, how many developers do we have in the ecosystem and what are they working on, right? But what our survey is designed and continues to be refined to focus on is what is the actual experience of these developers, step to step to step. So as we're in our second cohort, we did, not only for budget reasons, but get them assigned with a whole lot more responsibility. They've not only accepted that responsibility, but they've delivered on that, and I would say even a little bit more so as we're reaching this first quarterly milestone. So really excited to get out the report for what's happened so far this year, and excited to see what happens in the rest of 2026 with the continued development of that program. We are hopeful to further expand that with future budgetary funding to, again, continue to bring developers in kind of at that middle stage, right? They may fall in the contribution ladder between a regular contributor and a trusted committer. And the goal would be to have our developer advocates move from trusted committers, right, or trusted contributors within the ecosystem to hopefully that community maintainer and above. Each of them have their different things that they are responsible for, which is great, or different things that they're good at, I should say. And that would be a really important piece of what I've mentioned here, is that although it is the developer advocate program, not every single one of them is, let's say, your down deep software engineer. There are some of them who are really focused on that community side of things, and really good at even at the marketing side of things, which is super important as well. But still having that understanding and that wherewithal to do things from the development perspective. So hopefully that rounds it up, but more updates coming with the developer advocate program.
Yep. And then we, with the possum, we actually have the last 2 categories that we did for our pilot this year. which are kind of going into 2026 of actual implementation. But security and response. So as you're in a decentralized ecosystem and you used to have centralized security practices, there's a need to adapt that, especially when the core repositories are not under a member-based organization. So we did institute a security policy to get the basics in place, security MD file, the security response team, and a bare bones incident management process, and then a security council that sits between the TSC and the OSC. So that way they can still operate autonomously, but still have counterpoints that they're accountable to. And with that, we did put in a common open source practice, typically is a bug bounty program. So that way we can actually get ahead of vulnerabilities, have them ethically reported, and reward the people helping us with that. And then the security incident response program is to help bring in a professional to help lead the incident response and help us improve the practice from there. So we still have the job open for that for anyone who's interested in applying. But that's with the recent incident. I think we can proudly say that even with the bare bones necessity we had, for us to take the less or the most desired chain with the least amount of stake and still get it ahead of the poison transaction chain speaks volumes about how the community comes together and handles these kind of incidents, and almost, I would say, even the biggest test Cardano's gone through. So we succeeded there with a winding success. But that's a critical need in any open source piece, and we're trying to work on that with the Security Council for that decentralized aspect. And the bug bounty program so far has been a success. We've gotten several submissions. We're just validating them, and ensuring that the reports actually go to the core Cardano network, and it's not just some institution asset here and there. So that way the money goes to where it's intended. The other piece to this is the ecosystem growth and commercialization. This has been my side project going since the very formation of Intersect. People in the commercialization working group, we've had in and out of 20 to 30 people coming through there. We do have a SWOT analysis that I recommend everyone look at from 2024. It's strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for Cardano. It's really well vetted, and it kind of highlights Cardano's needs, which I think even the new critical integrations budget actually starts to address. But under this, we have the accelerator program, which is a very small pilot with the working group to try and help enhance the proposals of different ideas and innovation arm of Cardano. And I'm happy to say we do have a partnership with the CF Venture Hub coming about through this, where what we're trying to do is, the best example is proposals that go into Catalyst pre and post. Those are just to get MVPs, and they're not really built into this everlasting product per se. They're just an MVP that's innovating. So what we're trying to do through this is help the projects grow and accelerate and actually become viable products on Cardano. That way this is where the sustainability thing for the Possum comes together, which is if we have more actual viable tooling and products that are building on Cardano, and we get more ecosystem adoption, this is where everything comes back around, that through the TVL and the transaction fees, treasuries reimbursed, funds back the things that everyone's building on top of, etc. But through this accelerator program, we got 3 focuses, which is, one is to help people learn how to build a commercial open source project or commercial open source software. And through that, you'll get your basically your business plan together about how you're going to run your project. The second one is more on mock pitching VC environments. So the idea out of that workshop is you would actually have your pitch deck. And then the third one's about product market fit / technical validation. So if you go through each of these, you basically do have a workshop tailored to each of the different needs that a product needs to enhance its success and succeeding and securing future funding. So that's what the idea is behind this.
Well, now that we've gone through and highlighted a number of the programs, let's, again, I've got a favorite term here, take a step back, but we'll take another look at still V1, so bear with us here, of what the paid open source model looks like. And so, if you haven't seen this, I do encourage you to really take a second to look at it. There are a lot of pieces to this to understand, but there's a lot of synergy throughout it as well. Everything on the left there is what's under Intersect, or specifically Open Source Office, with the guidance of the Open Source Committee. Basically what we control, and our direct outputs there, ideally into products or open source libraries. Again, just following that, either commercialization or integration is what we're looking to. But Christian, this is your primary brainchild here, so take it over.
Yeah, my apologies. As everyone probably knows, this is one of the ugliest slides I've ever done, but the architecture is there. And Adam Deans, you can scold me the rest of my life on this. But essentially the idea is you start on the top right with the Cardano treasury, or even revenue models, your source of funding. If you're going to spend $1 of that, are you maximizing value, and what are the structures to support that? That is the whole question behind this. Now you'll move over to the triangle hat, and this does not have to be Intersect. The idea here is we used Intersect as the example for how this model is supposed to work, but you could fill it with Cardano Foundation, Pragma, any other institution within, or even CDEC, any other institution or DAO within this ecosystem, and how they are developing things. So under Intersect, you have the software development lifecycle, which is how all products are built in software in general. And so for that, the idea came into how do we put funds towards these things. So with ideation and productization, that's where I thought the Code Forest model helps. It helps people with different ideas integrate into the existing projects, and or even build a feature that enhances a potential profile of a project. And then when we get into the other 6 steps, or the other 4 steps, with the technical validation, budgeting, implementation, and measurement, that's where maintainer retainer assists directly, keeping the knowledge and the talent behind the projects there. Now the tooling, sustainability, and accelerator program also complement this stuff, but I'm just talking about within the house of Intersect. And within the house of Intersect, you'll see there in the light blue where you have the open source office on the top, which is Intersect's direct investment for staff to lead this initiative. And then the open source committee, which is the hierarchy determining the SDLC with the technical steering committee and product committee. So you have at least 3 bodies around technical ops that all target innovation under the software development life cycle in different ways. Now from this, you'll see stemmed out this beautiful, poorly drawn red dotted line. That is everything that the open source office or the committee can directly influence as of this moment. And that's where all our programs are built out of. So out of the house of Intersect, which is the big rectangle, everything in there goes towards the 2 categories, as Tex mentioned, which is products and open source libraries. Now with these being developed, we put specific frameworks around them to ensure success, which is the project incubation at the top and the contribution ladder at the bottom. Both of these work in tandem, where the contribution ladder dictates how to mature in a role in a project to become part of the maintainer aspect of things, and also make a clear framework for contribution guidelines. And it's meant to be adaptable to each project's use case, but it helps ensure sustainability and transparency with the open source libraries and how to engage. And then the incubation side of it is actually a risk mitigation factor, where we're trying to build maturity for projects and make sure that we're not just keeping projects on GitHub for the sake of it. They actually have a life cycle to them to make sure that they're active. And then stemming from that, you have 2 different working groups, such as a tooling working group and a commercialization working group, with their associated line items to directly support these initiatives with the funding under the paid open source model. And the open source libraries, the reason this is included before it goes to commercial adoption is this is what the businesses are building on top of, and should be quote unquote 90% of their SBOM if you pull in the figure I mentioned earlier. And then with the commercialization working group, they help directly into this commercial adoption piece. And the idea is, if we're improving and sustaining the open source libraries and improving and maturing the products, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to start entering the market, and either we're getting investment from venture capitalists for building to their specific needs and use cases, or we have clients with needs that they're willing to pay for something and we're building to that, or we actually have something that's so innovating that we are leading and trying to get customers to adopt to it. Now, from this bucket, obviously, that's where you get back to the Cardano treasury because the transaction fee is on chain. But there's 3 other buckets that need to be tackled. And we do have some things here. But when we were talking about Bitergia and ecosystem landscape mapping, that's where ecosystem mapping comes in. We need to be able to transparently see where all these transactions and interactions are taking place wholesale. So that way we can strategically align different initiatives to improving this commercial adoption aspect. Obviously, we need market research. That one's self-explanatory, and then business alliances, especially if you're talking supply chain. You can't just enter on one aspect. You got to enter on multiple clients' needs to be able to flow into that naturally. And so that's where we come full house, and y'all can hate me for this, but we have plenty of explainer videos on this diagram, and I promise to make it pretty and simpler at some point. But this is every single step behind the paid open source model, why it matters, and it wasn't just an ad hoc idea where we get money and throw it somewhere. There is strategy to every element here. So
Perfect. All right. Always have to sum this up again, but we'll get back into a little bit of the functional of how do we do this? How do we actually carry this out? And I will tell you for a fact, we could not do this without our partners. So we've got a number of different partners, and this list just continues to grow. As we are seeking or have sought to really build ourselves as a foundation, we've not only copied a few things, but worked directly with the Linux Foundation, now the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust. We do have the Chinstrap Penguin there, and then also the To-Do Group, another group that spurred out from the Linux Foundation. I actually recognize that maybe we left somebody out on this slide, but that's also the Chaos Group, another group from LinkedIn there, or sorry, Linux Foundation there as well. So we're involved in a number of different ways of some of the big happenings with open source and continued development from a general standpoint. Our 3 that we have mentioned primarily here, Bitergia is our first and probably will be our forever in that regard. Consistently providing analytics as well as expertise to better understand the analytics and the metrics that we're looking at, better ways for us to manage the review and analysis of that as well. We are now working with TX Pipe and the GitHoney platform here. We're going to be setting that up for the Bug Bounty program. But we also have hopes and dreams to use that for the Code Forest program as well. Again, as Christian mentioned earlier, the main thing is keeping any level of payment or transacting that we're doing still something that's happening on chain for Cardano, right? Anything that we can do to continue the development or continue building what's actually happening on chain is going to be super important for us. And another highlight of that is going to be Andamio. If Andamio is still new to you, that's completely understandable, but I highly encourage you to kind of get involved and find out what's going on. Andamio is going to be working with us in a number of ways, not only as a project where we can help provide some maintainers for them, but also as the project where we're actually going to manage our maintainers that are under that maintainer retainer program. In future, I'm hoping that they're a big part of what we do for accreditation as well, but we'll have to see what comes out of that. But basically what that is, it's a contributor management platform with its own treasury. Something we're very familiar with as we've seen a number of DAOs previously, but this allows you to give a little bit more purpose to it with lots of additional reporting and full clarity from even the very beginning to the very end in validating who is receiving what and making sure that they are receiving the correct amounts as well. But yeah, we're more than happy to go into these partners here at any time. I'd say that I've had a number of conversations with each of these here, but Christian, what do you have to say about our partners?
Yeah, so as mentioned before, Bitergia is a big sell for us. It's the first one. Gives us visibility into everything, and plus they are a connection partner to the bigger world as well because they're integrated in most of the big open source projects. LFDT, if you're not a part of them in the Web3 space, you're kind of irrelevant as a name brand in open source. But the thing I'm proud about there is now with the launch of Midnight and then joining the LFDT and our interconnections with Hedera, we're trying to work to pioneer this narrative as a Web3 focus with these different L1s or partner chains essentially, and trying to set the standard for what open source means in a Web3 ecosystem. Chinstrap is another one. I highly recommend people do them. They're part of our partner on the accelerator program. Me and Juan Sierra actually joined one of their workshops about understanding licensing for projects, the legal aspects of when you're looking for commercial open source software, different things that way. Highly recommend everyone attend one of their sessions. And they also do provide free legal support for projects in our ecosystem. And if there is any cost for any of these things, that's where we do have the project support to help offload some of that. And these partners aren't chosen willy-nilly. They are highly vetted, brought in, and then community or committee adopted. So it's not just our say-so. And if they're free, we just incorporate them. That's another thing. But we still make sure that they're well vetted before then. The other one here is the To-Do group. So if anyone understands open source program offices or the concept behind it, To-Do is the Linux Foundation official staple for institutionalizing those standards, specifically in the Web 2 space. When we were setting up Intersect's open source office, we had heavy consultations with them on the implementation and practice as we were working with Tweag as well. I got a lot of my open source knowledge from them, but we are a part of them, and we're trying to incorporate the adaptations we had to make for Web3 open source management. And maybe we do our own spinoff, similar to-do group specifically for Web3 under the LFDT, or we incorporate these standards through them. But the idea is everything we want here to be replicable for other ecosystems. We're not trying to hide or keep things for our own namesake. Each one of these partners brings something to the table and helps amplify Cardano as a whole in the open source mission. So it's less about money grabs and more about the mission that we have going. And that's why I actually like all our partners here.
All right, well, let's take it back to where we started here, right? We're dropping that cowboy aesthetic, and we're really going to put a focus on terraforming and moving from the moon to where we're headed. So, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, whether everyone hates this or not, we kind of are in that space theme, hence all the updated graphics, and we're at the moon. We're building space stations now. It's not just pioneer towns or metropolises or things centric to Cardano itself. It's about engaging and collaborating and moving Cardano away from being the ghost chain stigmatism. And with the launch of Midnight and our partnerships going on with Hedera at the folk side too, that's where this is very applicable. So as we start to become more on the global stage, it's important that we hit these goals and keep these in mind, or these principles, is that we need to have a shared commons where open source serves as the universal language. And it's not about centralization or ownership, but that transparency and collaboration through and through. Because the reason we've had success is because people have joined who understood that mission, or who didn't understand it, came along and then fell in love with it. That's why open source has never been a dying movement. Even in the early days when Google and Microsoft were hesitant to it because it was against their ROI on personal investment funds. But then when they actually came to incorporate open source, it became the biggest moneymaker for them in that sense, because it opens up a whole new level of collaboration. Not that money is the game changer, but just being able to build stuff for everyone else to utilize. Decentralized growth needs to be another institutional pillar, where it's all about communities self-organizing using open frameworks for funding, governance, and collaboration. What we have here is just one approach. Take it, rip it apart, utilize it however you want, even give us feedback. We're not staying to a central game here. Everything is about whatever helps Cardano succeed. If Intersect is irrelevant in the future, it's the community to decide. That's the beauty of it. And the other thing is we need to focus on being interoperable by design. This ties into standards, tooling, and practices to involve support and cooperation amongst ecosystems. Trying to build a shared standard of goals and things to work against. One thing I like that the community is already coming around is trying to build their own consensus for smart contract auditing guidelines, standards, best practices, trying to build a community there, potential stipend to help lower end projects be able to afford the auditing that they need. It's things like this that become beautiful, where it's us as an ecosystem having different things going on that all connect to that same mission. which is basically collective stewardship. We're all stewards here. There's not a king or a monarch that rules at the end of the day. Anyone, that's the beauty of open source. If you disagree with someone, you can always fork the library and do your own thing with it, as long as the license is permissible to do so. But we need to always be about evolving the commons, and we are one part of a larger galaxy. And something I'm going to throw here that everyone should look up, and maybe we can link it, is Bitergia did a ecosystem analysis for Hedera, and it outlines the open source development amongst many L1s and their collaboration stuff. And when you look at it, Hedera, Ripple, and Cardano were on the periphery of that, where we had some interactions, but we need to be more in this ecosystem, in this bigger space, not trying to isolate ourselves. Yes, we are a mission-driven blockchain, but we need to identify things. That's where, if we're aligning with the other outliers, it makes an easier integration mission. So that's where we are. Cowboy hats are off, and now we're either space cowboys or astronauts, whatever y'all decide the nomenclature is.
Yeah, well, we'll close it out and bring it down to the end here. Gonna get this up right away for everybody, so definitely drop us a like or subscribe to the channel if you haven't. There's lots of content coming out here from open source. Depending on when you're watching this or whatever it is, please come to us with your questions, and you can hit us up on pretty much any channel. We love having the questions because it makes us stronger, and it also shares with more than just those that are asking. So whether that's leaving it here in a comment on the YouTube video, whether that's leaving a comment or a reply on the X thread, even if you're reaching us here on LinkedIn, definitely go ahead and leave us your thoughts and comments there as well. At any point, reach out to us, oso@intersectmbo.org. If you happen to reach myself or Christian directly, I believe we both have our calendars set up as well. We try not to fill them up too much, but we don't close them off. So feel free to schedule a meeting if you absolutely need to. But yeah, we definitely welcome your questions, your thoughts, your feedback, and we appreciate you continuing to tune in and hopefully continuing to tune in the future as well.
Yep. It's always good to see everybody. And sorry, we're with all the work going on, we will try to do this more regularly and provide these updates. But thank y'all for being on the journey and actually supporting and being behind our mission. It's literally the one thing that keeps me in text going amidst all the drama and politics of Cardano in general, knowing that everyone actually cares about the mission we're trying to pioneer.
Well said. Well said. We'll sign it off from the open source office. We'll catch you next time.